Hello my dear friends, how is it going? I'm Marty Theriger and today I'm going to talk about the 9 herbs of Odin. You know, little green stuff to make a fine risotto. Now, just before we start, I think you ought to know that this is actually the first video I am making after I got COVID. After 3 years of escaping it, the little bugger finally cocked up with me and it hit me pretty hard. It's still a little bit hard to breathe and my health isn't as sound as it was, and I feel like it has had a severe impact on my cognitive capacities. Not that I was bright before, but I surely feel dumber now. So, anyway, I'll take it slowly and I'll do my best to have a coherent speech and let's see how this goes. Apologies beforehand. So, let's get straight to it. As has been said here a few times, there is little evidence of the use of plants and herbs in Scandinavia before Christianization. When it comes to ethnobotany, or indeed evidences in the archaeological context or record, and the use of plants and the very few evidences we have from the type of plants that constituted a Viking garden, well, we do not have enough evidences. Regarding herbal medicine in the Viking Age, in truth, there are very little recorded evidences concerning plants used as medicinals during the Viking Age. As also said here before, the first herbals and other medical texts in Scandinavia were not produced until the 13th and the 14th centuries, and all of them show a very clear influence from continental European beliefs and practices about medicine, rather than actually something focused on Scandinavian culture. But of course, the use of herbs and plants for both culinary, medicinal and also magical uses has accompanied human beings since ancient times. In Viking Age Scandinavia it wasn't different, surely. Several plants would have been used, which in addition to providing food, threads for weaving, hemp for boat ropes, many plants were also responsible for giving a special flavor to everyday food, curing ailments, and even providing a connection with the gods. Although there isn't an extensive pre-Christian literature on the subject, some literary sources offer us fundamental data for the study of the importance of flora in medieval Scandinavian daily life, whether in cooking, medicinal or magical use, which are often not excluded, and in fact medicine and magic were complementary until quite late throughout Europe, until the mid-19th century, and we have this perception mostly in folklore and traditional folk magic. Well, many species were domesticated and were cultivated in gardens close to the houses to be used during spring and summer. During the winter time they were used dried, and well, for that they were harvested and put to dry and stored hanging on the walls and at the roof of the house, or even in small ceramic pots. Most herbs had a dual use, medicinal and culinary, or medicinal and magical, as their use as a sort of spice was appreciated for giving food a better flavor, and they were also used as food preservatives, and as we see in traditional folk magic, the administration of an herb or plant for medicinal purposes was usually accompanied with a prayer or evocation, making this combination between magic and medicine that until quite recently this distinction was not as clear as we have it today. The medicinal use of culinary herbs can be proven both by material culture and also by some literary sources. Today it is possible to see some plants used in the Viking Age in reconstituted gardens such as in Lejre, Denmark, and Trelleborg, Sweden. So now let's then look at the main magical plants and herbs of medieval Scandinavia. So let's start with linen and leek. These two I've already covered on the video I've done about the runic magic formula Allu. So if you have the time, of course, and patience, please do watch that video. And I have my own work cut out for me, fortunately. Thank the gods and thank my past self. In that video, I don't just talk about the rune magic formula Allu, but also Laukar or Laukas. Usually these two formulas come together. Laukar is Lik, which also led me to talk about the story of Volsa Þáþre within the chapter Olaf's Saga Helga in the Fletteriar book Codex. Volsa Þáþre speaks of a supposedly pagan phallus cult, the Volsi, a horse's phallus, which is wrapped in linen after being bathed in a mixture of plants, one of which were leeks. From the flax plant, the fiber was removed to make linen fabric, and also due to its healing power, it was used in poultices. Linen is a clear symbol of wealth and power in medieval Scandinavia, mind you. On the other hand, we have leeks, which were widely used to make amulets for sexual magic and fertility magic as well. That is why the use of flax, and in its altered form, a textile, a piece of cloth made from flax, a linen cloth, such as leeks as well in Volsa Þáþre's tale, is quite curious. Therefore, the use of herbs that would be used for sexual magic and as fertility amulets where the horse's phallus is bathed, and linen as a poultice to wrap and preserve it, creating a cold object related to fertility and sexuality. These plants are also related to necromancy, but for more information on these aspects of these plants, I invite you to watch the video previously mentioned. Another plant is Mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris, used excessively for domestic medicine and considered the quintessential female herb. It increases breast milk, eases menstrual cramps, an auxiliary herb to the uterus in labor contractions, relieves pregnancy sickness. It also facilitates childbirth. However, this plant should not be administered in very early stages of pregnancy, as it can cause miscarriage or premature labor. Apparently, it was used to facilitate childbirth at the time it really should be done, right? It also has an analgesic effect, powerful digestive and calming action. This was a plant that was cooked, dried or altered in some way. It was never used raw, as in that state it is highly toxic. It is also possible making a herbal oil infusion out of mugwort. It is also a culinary herb, and mugwort was also added to flavor ale. Another plant is yellow bedstraw, known in the Nordic world as Frøyargras, the herb or plant of the goddess Frøya. Possibly because mostly in Germany or Central Europe and Scandinavian countries, it was placed on the woman's bed during labor to symbolically protect the newborn. Hence, in the Nordic world, it was associated with the goddess Frøya. Maiden hair fern or Venus hair fern, popularly known by the Icelandic name of Frøyahar, Frøya's hair, also used to relieve menstrual cramps. It's interesting, right, to see the popular names given to such plants which convey a link between the feminine and attributes of a goddess. And this surely facilitates the basic comprehension for what it was used for and towards whom. As mentioned on another video, one herb used extensively in Scandinavia, both in cooking and also prized for its medicinal qualities, was fawn. Angelica officinalis or Angelica archangelica, known in the Scandinavian world as Heitivon or just Von, commonly known as Garden Angelica or Norwegian Angelica, and we find it in archaeology on a more, let's say, Viking garden context. A plant introduced in continental Europe by the Vikings precisely, and widely used in medieval Iceland, being its most popular medicinal plant actually, widely used for stomach and respiratory problems. It is these plants of which we have the most concrete evidences, mainly due to ethnobotany applied to archaeology. There is, of course, henbane or stinking nightshade, which I have talked about when I've made the video about the berserkir. It grew in some vegetable gardens and gardens in general in the Viking era, and was used to relieve excruciating pain and even difficult births. However, it was rare and expensive at the time, hard to grow, hard to come by, so it was used in a very moderate way. So I'm not going to develop here on that particular plant because on that other video I've already spoken of it, and it isn't a plant that was extensively used in pre-Christian Scandinavian context as the previously mentioned plants, which had a far greater presence in the daily lives of Nordic peoples of the late Iron Age and the Middle Ages, or the early Nordic Middle Ages. In the poem 9 Herbs Charm, we find the names of 9 herbs used for enchantment or magical use, and also their medicinal use. When analyzing the poem and the description of the herbs, we find that all these herbs had a triple use, as previously mentioned: culinary, medicinal, and magical. The 9 Herbs Charm is an Old English incantation recorded in the 12th century Lochmunga manuscript. There's some dispute concerning the date of this manuscript. Some say it was recorded in the 10th century, others point to the 12th century. Well, it is clear that its contents aren't of a single historical period. It may have been written or recorded in a particular historical moment, of course, but the contents are older and from different periods, right? Now, concerning the poem, the incantation is intended for the treatment of intoxication and infection through a preparation of 9 herbs. The number 9 and 3, very significant in Germanic paganism and later Germanic folklore, and in the Nordic medieval cultural world, of course, which are mentioned frequently within this incantation. The importance of such numbers has already been discussed here in another video, especially highlighted in Old Norse mythology. The number 3 obviously has tremendous importance in several societies and respective cultures. However, in Old Norse literature, the number 3 will gain renewed impact due to Christianity, but it is the number 9 that shows a far greater focus on pagan ideologies and belief systems. The number 9 in Old Norse literature is far more inclined to pagan belief systems and also both magic and the feminine, and feminine magic, of course. The world and 9 realms created by 9 giantesses or female trolls, as in magic beings or goddesses. The 9 steps, phases, or trials to acquire the secrets of feminine magic and to enter the enclosure of a goddess and from her acquire the deep feminine magic secret. You get the point. I have delved into this on that other video, so no point in repeating it all over again. Now, the poem in question contains references to pagan and Christian English elements, including a mention of the great Germanic god Woden. In this case, the poem contains one of 2 clear Old English mentions of Woden in Old English poetry. Woden, whom to Scandinavians would be known as Odin. Of course, we must keep in mind that we are dealing with a poem that is clearly a literary work that has a pagan basis, or on the other hand, or in other words, reflects an older content of a pagan character, but that was subjected to Christian censorship. But I want to focus on the 9 Herbs Charm. Here I'm going to display the text in Old English, therefore the original, and the following translation is made from compared versions of modern English and guided by the original text in Old English. I will remain silent for a few moments, which will give me some time to breathe, and that way you will also get to know the text, if you please. From these prayers to 9 different herbs, we get the perception of precisely 9 important herbs, mainly administered for healing purposes. So we start with Mugwort, which was already mentioned here previously, and it also makes an appearance in this poem. It's actually the first one mentioned. Then Plantain is the second one mentioned, described as the mother of herbs. It was also used to combat poisoning. It was used to combat stomach stomach ailments and to purify the blood. Healing poultices for wounds were also made from this herb. Hairy bitter cress, or referred to in here as Stune Lamb's cress, used to combat the effect of poisons, as its digestive and purgative action facilitated the elimination of toxins. Also widely used, and this use extends to the present day, in the treatment of respiratory infections. Urtica, or seed nettle, also known as stinging nettles, against poison, and good teas against infections in the far west of Europe to this day. A plant that is related to magical use because it contains thorns and the slightest contact with the skin causes irritation. Nettle is one of the first plants to bloom after long winters. It was widely used as a medicine due to its high healing power, and as food, as well as the high concentration of mineral salts makes it a highly nutritious plant, which helped the body to recover after a long dehydrated process and after the intake of salty foods. Even today, nettle is used as a powerful food against anemia. Attorlaðe, which some translations point to venom loathor. There is some dispute as to the actual plant that is being referred to here, and I admit I had a little bit of a trouble because this seems to come out of nowhere, and I thought it was still a reference to the previous 2 herbs, so I was missing one herb here, which was quite strange. It may either be Cockspur grass or Betony or wood Betony, used as an antidote and as food for animals. Matricaria, commonly known as chamomile. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is one of the most used plants still today, right? I mean, at least I grew up with this plant, or this is one of the plants I grew up with, always having it at home, and even now there's plenty of tea from it. Much used to fight infections and inflammations caused by injuries and also for breathing-related illnesses. Next, Wergulu, crab apple or wild apple or apple in general. This fruit used both for the manufacture of beverages such as cider and tea, and in foods such as various sweets and bread, also had a sacred character. The goddess Idun, who watched over the apples that ensured the youth of the gods, was stolen. She was kidnapped, and from then on, that moment onwards, the gods began to age, began to grow old. In many cultures, this fruit is sacred, a symbol of knowledge, eternal life, rebirth. The apple is, per excellence, a sacred fruit. In the poem, it is described as an antidote and also used as protection against poisoning. Also used as an analgesic. Finally, we have thyme or Chervil and Fennel. Chervil, often confused with parsley due to their morphological similarity, which is also used as a substitute for it. It was used against poisons and to relieve pain, especially stomach pain, and also as a diuretic. And fennel, widely used as a remedy for intestinal and stomach problems. It was used in cooking because it is very aromatic. Now, one of the parts of this poem that intrigues me the most is, of course, the reference to Woden, the Old English name for the god Odin. Woden took 9 twigs, which is reminiscent of Odin picking up and lifting the runes. We know about Odin's extraordinary powers on a variety of fields, including in the healing arts. It has been suggested, of course, that this part of the poem may allude to picking up 9 different runes, one for each herb. Personally, I would say that it is not as far-fetched as some might think, because if we look into Norwegian, Icelandic, Swedish rune poems and so on, we get the perception that it was for didactic purposes, to facilitate and to learn how to write with runes by associating the sound value and the letter value to a particular thing. So it wouldn't be strange that these 9 twigs in some other earlier version would have been specific runes associated to each herb to facilitate remembering the names of the herbs that are to be applied together for a potent remedy against poison. Furthermore, it is curious, the reference to the serpent, which, sure enough, it appears here more on a Christian context as the bearer of all evils and diseases. So there's a certain holiness to the charm and the herbs and plants applied to get rid of evil moods that assail the body. But I cannot help to think about the pagan understandings towards the serpent or worm or the dragon and a connection to Odin. We are talking about an animal that wasn't always understood as an evil entity, and such immoral and wicked aspects to it were further augmented by Christian religious morals and myths. The serpent has been associated with feminine magic, often linked to the powers of underworld goddesses. The serpent as a pagan iconography related to the magical arts, knowledge, the fertility of the soils. The symbol of the serpent, in pagan contexts, represents knowledge, ancestral wisdom, and the feminine magic arts, related to both ancestral knowledge and magic mysteries. We often see the god Thor, the thunder god, associated with the world serpent in mythological accounts that have been frankly misinterpreted through a Christian lens. And certainly those very myths have been used and reshaped to fit into Christian religious teachings to better convey such religious morals and beliefs to the pagans, to better convert or easily convert the pagans. However, the fight of Thor against the serpent isn't wholly Christian, but an allusion to the fight dance between the sky fertility god or the thunder person with the earth goddess, which together in chaos create life and fertility, order from chaos. But Thor isn't the only Norse god related to the serpent. In some Vandal period helmets, we see helmet plates with the representation of Odin with a serpent. And in the Osberg tapestry, we have a grove of serpents and a hanged man from a tree, in relation to the cult of Odin. The serpent was also a symbol of wisdom. Speaking of the myth of Ragnarok, which certainly Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century has reshaped it to fit into Christian eschatology, but the destruction of the serpent in a pagan context is in reference to the destruction of balance and the destruction of the protection of life itself. In other words, we could see this as a fervent search for wisdom and power, and such wisdom and power, if not applied carefully and correctly, may be very destructive. It is possible that in a pagan version, the death of the world serpent represented the beginning of Ragnarok. The very power that holds and protects life is destroyed, opening up the way for chaotic and destructive forces to take over and destroy all life. Again, of course, this motif was highly used to convey Christian teachings and religious ideologies in later medieval Icelandic literature, but the pagan core of it may be indeed the representation of imbalance when one seeks to control the forces of nature, which will only result in one's own destruction and the destruction of others. So, I think it is important to have that in mind to try to understand the iconography of the serpent related to Odin and Odinic cults. We are probably in the presence of a deity whose relationship with the symbology of the serpent is more on the grounds of be active in the magical arts, possessing knowledge of feminine magic and the healing and fertility powers of the earth. So, in this charm, there may have been this emphasis on the serpent as a pagan symbol of knowledge and the power of the healing arts, which in this charm there's a corruption of this motif and turning it into a Christian perspective of the serpent as a bearer of evil, disease, and death, silencing references to both pagan magic and belief systems, as well as feminine powers that are so often referred to in many myths involving Odin, and the quest to obtain some secret power being kept by a feminine entity. But of course, this is just an idea, of course. The charm in question, especially this part in reference to Woden, is open to interpretation because we don't truly know what this is all about. But it is clear that through this charm we see a clear mixing of paganism and Christianity in order to convert the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. And of course, there's the important part which I quote, if you don't mind, so if you please. They were created by the wise Lord, holy in heaven as he hung. He sat and sent them to the 7 worlds. It is rather curious, this figure hanging from the heavens. It is in reference to Christ, but then again, we seem to have the replacement of Odin, or Woden in this case, for Christ. It is a significantly important motif in Old Norse myths, the self-sacrifice of Odin, as through that process he gained the knowledge, the secret knowledge of the runes by hanging himself of Yggdrasil in self-sacrifice. On the other hand, we seem to have here Christ, who gained his knowledge of the charm, secret knowledge of the charm, while hanging on the cross in his own act of self-sacrifice. The motifs are well blended. In fact, I should like to add that in Scandinavia, iconography often associated to the cult of Odin and to Odin was also associated to God and mostly to Christ by the end of the Scandinavian Iron Age and the beginning of the Middle Ages in the north. We see this particular aspect in relation to the swastika, which is a symbol in Scandinavia that will be often associated to Odin and to the cult of Odin, which then on rune stones and on churches' decorations, the swastika will progressively be associated with Christ as a solar motif. So we have these constant references to Odin progressively being replaced by Christ in an elite social space. And we seem to have the same thing here on this charm, particularly this last aspect of obtaining the knowledge of the charm itself. Again, this charm clearly reflects the mixing of paganism and Christianity in order to convert the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. Sadly. My dear friends, I do hope you have enjoyed this video. I do hope to be in better health and condition for the next video and to continue on making videos. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, tack för idag. Thanks for today. Obrigado por hoje. Until we meet again, my dear friends.